the role of media in Nepal-India relation. This is the webinar series that has been going on by, organized by AIDIA, and today they have given me the role of moderator, so I am here with you. I think we'll have a very good and very solution-oriented, positive, affirmative discussion, constructive discussion, so that people in the higher level can hear and work according to, do according to that. Since we all know, we all are mostly the journalists, so we all know media as a fourth pillar, as a important pillar of the democracy and all this. But media as media's role in shaping the foreign policy, and especially in the time of crisis, like currently we're facing, though being a very close neighbor, the long open border that is very unlikely in the world. We share a lot of culture, history, and we have a lot of similarities. But this type of issues crop up time and again, because when there is a very close relationship, there are some misunderstandings as well. So, but still in India, some section of media in India and in Nepal also, we were facing the pressure that we should also act like some section of the Indian media. These all are going on, but we are today talking not that. We're talking about how can media play a constructive role in shaping the better relation, and how we can, as a decision-making input source in the foreign policy, how can work on it. So I will start with Mr. Ajaya Khanal. He is the former editor with the Himalayan Times. We have a very distinguished panelist. I'll just take names first so that we can know each other. Mostly we know each other as we all are in the same field. We have Subir Bhaumik from, we have Pramit Chaudhary, foreign editor, Hindustan Times Daily. And we have Ajaya Nishant, executive president, Nepal Democratic or NDA. And then we have Ajaya Khanal, former editor at the Himalayan Times. We have Biswas Baral, editor at the Annapurna Express. And we'll start with Mr. Ajaya Khanal. So what do you think? You were in media for a long time, and since long you worked and again left, and then again you're in the Himalayan Times, and again you are out. What do you think? As a input source for decision making in foreign policy, what role should media play, and what do you think the role played by Nepali media and Indian media in today's this issue? How do you watch this? Please unmute yourself and unmute yourself. Okay. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Kuberji, for moderating this discussion. I think before we go into discussing the actual role of the media and what we can do, I think we need to take a look at the context of what's happening. And more or less, we know about the general context about what's happening and why it's happening. So I think it's important to also look at the trends in the media, the causal factors behind, the current problems we are having. So if we look into the context, we know that, there are political differences. There is an element of political conflict, and political differences and conflict are arising out of specific issues like border disputes, issues with border management, issues linked to interference. For example, a lot of people are complaining about interference in domestic affairs, issues linked to sovereignty and nationalism. And this is actually leading to a kind of a media war. In recent days, we are seeing in the social media a kind of a back and forth between Nepali and Indian media. It has also gone to the extent of hackers, hacking into government websites. And so we have seen this growing anti-Indian media sentiments in Nepal, and probably a similar phenomena is taking place across the border. Um, and if we look into the media, especially relations between Nepali and Indian media, the dislike for Indian media is age old. For example, a go home Indian media trend uh, was seen during the 2015 earthquakes because of exaggeration and distortion of facts by the Indian media. And also because a lot of Nepali people feel that the Indian media plays a role in propagating and displaying a kind of a big brotherly attitude. And at the same time, the conflict is heightened at the moment because I think it is because the age of Nepali media is leading to more conflict. Earlier, it was more muted. So I think this is the general context, and within that context, certain media trends are taking place. For example, like the role of ideology, the role of money, ego, politics of identity. So there's a complaint that a lot media is actually selling its soul for certain benefits, and it is sort of dividing from its professional duties and professionalism. And at the same time, we see some sort of an erosion of institutional media, whether due to ideology, whether due to nationalism, or whether due to financial interest, or even vested interest. But at the same time, while the institutional media appears to be in decline, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of uh, its practice, there is also a proliferation of a number of media outlets and journalists in Nepal. So we can see that a certain kind of what McLuhan said is coming true. Medium is the message. So in the age of social media, in the age of Twitter and Facebook, there is a distinct characteristics of media personalities, how they practice journalism, and what kind of message they are sending. So there is this, institutional media is a kind of under threat from both internal and external factors. Internal meaning pressures of finance and money, and external factors, politics. And it's the same, I think it's same in both India and in Nepal, where money is a factor in distortion of professionalism. And at the same time, another major factor is politics, populism, and the linkages, interlinkage between ideology and identity. So in both Nepal and India, a similar trend is that of politics based on nationalism and politics based on identity, which is creating a kind of dangerous trend.
Uh, Sorry, your mic is muted. Please unmute.
Yeah, it automatically muted, so I'm sorry. So what I was saying was that the interlinkage between ideology and identity, and the dependence of politics, um, on ideology of nationalism and its monetization or politicization is leading to a kind of a more complicated kind of situation. And on top of that, we have malcontents and spoilers, both internal and external, who are playing. So the bottom line is that we want to improve relations uh, between Nepal and India. It is an imperative because there are a lot of reasons why we should uh, want to resolve differences and improve relations. But I think even that number is decreasing, which is a worrying sign in Nepal. A lot of people don't want to improve relations, and also because India cannot afford to disregard and isolate Nepal, and it is the same case for Nepal. So the way forward obviously is to try to look into the causes of why the relations is strained so much, and then try to work on it. So I'll later add
Come
to
to
that.
that in second round. I'll come to that in second round. We'll stop here. We'll stop you here about media only. Then we'll come to the second round. I'll go to Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhary. You heard Mr. Khanal saying about the proliferation of media, social media, influence, money, power, politics, nationalism, which is the great thing from USA to Nepal, everywhere in the current days, and contextual differences. So, what do you think? Media is to blame for all these bad names given to media, or social media and other things they are playing, like Mr. Khanal said, playing and ruining, spoiling our relations between India and Nepal? What do you think?
Well, I think the relationship, the present problems that India and Nepal are facing on the territorial issues, I don't think media came in after the problems began. I don't think Prime Minister only raised these issues because of media. That he raised them because of his own political interests. But they definitely are worsened, if you wish, by media. Media, as has been mentioned now in India and elsewhere, is fragmented and works on several different levels. So one is social media, obviously, which would not, in my view, really be media at all, because it's not very well. It's public opinion, if you wish, but public opinion only of a small group of people who actually are interested in getting involved. There's only a small fragment, not only about somewhere between 10 to 15% of people who are active on social media who actually bother to retweet or send messages and make statements. The vast bulk are passive and either don't care or have interests that are apolitical or nothing to do with anything. The primary movements on social media activity are things like pictures of animals and babies and stuff like that. Then we have television, which in India at least definitely has become much more nationalistic. It's highly fragmented. No major channel has more than 3 or 4% of the viewership. So therefore there's always a race to the bottom to try to maintain to increase your TRP ratings. And therefore the tendency is to be a bit extremist. Then there is the newspapers, which there are over 90,000 registered newspapers and magazines in India. So again, highly fragmented. Generally speaking, they are much more moderate. I say this, of course, as a newspaper man, so I'm biased. But they are often also not very focused on Nepal or other issues because they have a limited array of things that they can cover. The average newspaper in India will only carry somewhere about 15 stories on overseas issues, of which therefore, and we go by what our viewership is interested in. So the English language newspapers are very clear. The number one country of interest is the United States. So 70% of our coverage will be going to the United States simply because that's what our viewers are interested in, our readers are interested in. So automatically, therefore, Nepal tends to come through, as do other smaller countries, on an occasional basis, should we say, rather than on a regular standard basis. I would argue, I'm not too certain how many major Indian newspapers even have a full-time correspondent in Kathmandu anymore, probably just more than 3 or 4. So those are the layers that you're working with in terms of media. Obviously, in a country the size of India, with the degree of interest it has, and the fact that different parts of India have different focuses. So if you go to South India, Nepal is zero registry. It does not obviously come into their picture. Pakistan is not part of their worldview. They're much more interested in Sri Lanka or Singapore. I'm from Bengal. There is an interest in Nepal, but again, Bengal is much more interested in Bangladesh than it really is in something like Nepal. North India, obviously, there's a big focus on both Nepal and Pakistan as being the two primary neighbors of concern. So this further fragments or reduces the degree of interest, willingness to invest in understanding some of these issues. So those are, that's broadly the circumstances we're talking about. I don't think money matters very much when it comes to Nepal. There's not too much corporate interest or concerns about Nepal. The big companies that run the biggest media houses in India, whether Bennett and Coleman or HT Media, do not have investments in Nepal. There are other Indian companies which do, but they're not in the media business. They're very much focused on the Indian market. because that's where they make the bulk of their revenue. I'm not too certain the TV stations also, because I don't think they can monetize their viewership in Nepal. In other words, Indian companies do not pay for advertisements, will not pay extra money for advertising, even if you can claim I have so many viewers in Nepal or elsewhere. So I'm not too worried about the money side of issues. I think the bigger issue is just the question of having a better understanding and having the attention span to be able to really focus on something like Nepal is a bigger problem with Indian media.
Thank you. I'll go to Mr. Baral. Biswas Baral is the editor of Annapurna Express. Mr. Baral, after some section of Indian media reported some kind of issues with Nepal, like Manisha's issues and other issues, there was a tremendous pressure on Nepali editors asking them to report and do the news stories like some section of Indian media. What do you think? What pressure did you feel, and what do you think? Do you think that some section of Indian media is really, like Mr. Khanal said, is fanning the anti-Indian sentiment in Nepal? Do you think like that, Mr. Baral?
Okay, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Kuberji. Thank you, AIDIA. I think when you look at the sequence of events, first, the Indian Defense Minister inaugurated the Lipa Lake Road. Then Nepal released a statement that it was unhappy. But still, the Nepal government had not decided to amend the constitution to incorporate the new map. It was only after the statement from the Indian Army chief that the government came under tremendous pressure to do something about it. So I think there was a lot of public pressure from the grassroots level. So in that sense, more than media, I think it became an issue. The government was under so much pressure to do something to reflect the broader public sentiment. So that is how things started. And after the situation, after the controversy blew up, and it was I have been observing the Nepali and as well as Indian media very closely. And an interesting thing is, traditionally, say during the time of the blockade, the Nepali media was stridently anti-Indian. The coverage was very, very hard line, you could say. But this time they were much more muted. Our analysis, both in print and in broadcast media, was much more nuanced. On the other hand, if you looked at the Indian media, like the line, they started the story by saying China has taken Nepal under its control. That is the line that they were consistently trying to push, and they were much even the supposedly neutral or more nuanced channels were pushing that line, and there wasn't much nuance. That the nuance was missing, and I found that very strange. Compared to, when we compare the broadcast, the TV channels and the print media in India, the print media is of course much better. There's more nuance there, but I think comparing the two sets of media, the Indian broadcast media, Indian TV channels, news TV channels in particular, because they are watched by most Indians, right? And we talk about this roti-beti relation between Nepal and India, and the very close relation between two sets of people. So the people there are being influenced by what they hear in these channels, and so these channels made it sound like we had the Nepali people, the Nepali government had no independent agency. We were acting on China's behalf. And when you send that message, then the resolution also becomes very difficult, because now, earlier the Indian government had to negotiate with Nepal. Nepal is a small country, and many Indians don't feel so bad about negotiating with Nepal because it's a small country. There can be a give and take. But how do you concede ground to China? Now, when Indian media is saying, okay, if you give up Kalapani, you give land to China, then it also becomes extremely hard for the Indian government to negotiate like that, to concede the ground to China. So I think this time, this controversy has has again shown a very bad side to the Indian TV news channels and their powers to influence the public opinion in all the wrong ways. I'd say that much now.
So you mean to say that that Amir Khan movie, People Live, that was one of the images that the Indian TV channels, the TV section, one section of media is getting?
Which image?
The People Live image, the movie Amir Khan did some years ago.
People Live.
Yeah, but again, like these news channels, they depend on advertisement. They depend on certain government, certain government. I don't know what to say. Advertisement protection, and they are all about eyeballs. So I can't even blame them for doing that. Maybe, and the most depressing thing was that very few of these anchors who are hosting this program seem to know anything about Nepal. They knew very, very little. It was very evident by what they were saying that they knew next to nothing about Nepal. So. Yeah, so now I can also understand that they are more concerned about America and China, but right now Nepal has gone completely off the radar. The Indian Express used to have a correspondent here. I think the Hindu had a correspondent here. Hindustan Times had a correspondent. They're all gone now. So there's no one to keep the ground reality. Yeah, so there's a lot of room for miscommunication as well.
I'll stop here. I'll stop you here. Mr. Baral, I'll stop you here. We'll come to the second round. Now I'll go to Mr. Executive Director of NDA, Jayaji. You are out of all this media and you're watching both the sides of the stories. What do you think? From your point of view, what do you think? What should have been done?
Yeah, thank you for giving me that liberty of not speaking as a media person. The last time I appeared on television was, I think, a good 13 years back. So yes, at the moment, I'm not a practicing media person, but of course, I'm a very good media consumer.
Yeah, you
have. And looking at the media of both the countries, I think there are certain differences and distinctions that we should be bearing in our mind. Maybe we are almost watching Indian TV, whether we like it or not, invariably almost every day, and I think in quite substantial quantities in terms of time. Whereas if we talk about Indians, they get to know about Nepal through their media only on some very rare occasions. For us, anything in Bollywood or in cricket can be an everyday affair for us. But for Indian media to report anything on Nepal, there has to be something like a royal massacre, or let's say that massive earthquake, or a blockade, or something like that of Kalapani that is happening now. So we are finding ourselves in Indian televisions, or even in Indian newspapers, prime time or on the front page, only during either these calamities or something very extraordinary happening. So since we are influenced more by the Indian media than what they are influenced by us, because I think the Indians don't have any access to our media, barring a few, I think, social media stuffs. So the level of influence is definitely there on us that can come from Indian media. And let's just look at what is happening at this stage. I think Biswas perhaps touched it. It may not be only because the media that whatever decisions Mr. Oli took, he took, but I think media definitely was a triggering factor. When the Indian Defense Minister inaugurated through a video conference, well, that came, I think, in a very mild way. But when the Indian commander spoke it, I think that was carried quite widely by Nepalese media, both I think mainstream and also I think social media. And that was picked up by the parties in opposition. And I think that was something that put pressure on Mr. Oli to do something. And I think whether he really wanted to do something or not, that can be a story that would slowly be unfolding. But I think he found a very good excuse to save himself. So whatever the reason was behind, but I think the media was a triggering factor. And also, if we look around ourselves, I don't know what impresses us most or what influences us more, whether it is social media or mainstream media. And many a time, I think even mainstream media is carried through social media. So these days, I think, including me and several of my friends, I don't think they have time to read newspapers or even they have time to watch television news bulletins. Most of the news that they gather are through social media. And believe me, this social media, though I think there are a lot of very good meaning, right intention guys over there, but I think social media in Nepal, as it can be anywhere in the world, I think is, I won't use the word mobilized, but I think at least there is an attempt to give it a certain direction. And certain, I think, politically affiliated groups or individuals or media houses, I think are very good at it. So they really know which news to push through and which not to. And many a time, we as media consumer, being a common Nepali, I think are carried away. And let's look at this border issue of Kalapani, Limpuadhura or Lipule. I think these are very sensitive issues. And these are not only emotional issues, these are very legal and technical issues. So I think anybody who either speaks or writes about these issues need to be very, very careful. And as Biswas was saying, that perhaps the news that is coming from the other side of the border and the guys behind those news pieces, I don't think they have either interest or even time to do any research work. As the Indian television channels are mostly managed, I think, by the corporate directors and not the real editors, I think they are in rush of everything. And many a time, I think Pramit might like to endorse it, how they operate in a typical television, let's say, editor's room. All the Indian TV channels are running over there. They are muted. They are just looking at those news pieces on the television channels. And if they just find something over there, they think that, okay, this is something that is going to be very important. Then, since there is a rat race, within minutes or within seconds, they want to have a reply to that one, or they want to run it. So there is no time to research. There is no time to bring in, I think, the right kind of experts. And as we have just discussed that on ground as well in Nepal now, most of these Indian media outlets don't have their dedicated staffers or reporters. So I think many a time they are carried or influenced by one or the other media itself. So that has the snowball effect, what I see over here. So I think the call of the day is this. First, before you report something as sensitive as border, it has to be thoroughly researched. There has to be the right kind of people who should be talking about it, number one. Number two, Nepal being so close to India, as they say, Beti and Roti, but if we talk about their media, Nepal is so far away. As Pramit was saying that even on their foreign issues, 70% is taken by America. And by the time Nepal comes in the domain, I think it's not even 0.5 or 1%. So I think perhaps that has to be changed, if at all media has to be interested in making some impact. And lastly, but not the least, what I want to draw over here as a conclusion is this. Are the governments of the two sides really use media as a source to have any inputs for their policy decisions? I think that perhaps is not the case on either side of the border. Instead, what they do is they want to use media on both the sides to meet their final objectives. And since both the governments on India and India are by and large, let's say, believing in propaganda a lot these days, so I think they want to use media vehicles as their vehicles to carry out their messages. I think there lies the real danger. We, being the very neutral media consumers, we want to see good reports, we want to read good news items. But I think if these news items or these news reports are driven by some vested, interested political groups or parties, then I think that has a danger of being misguided as people or as an individual. So I think, yes.
Now, I'll stop you here.
Yeah.
We'll come to the next round to you. Mr. Subir Bhaumik, former BBC correspondent and managing editor of the Eastern Link, has joined us. We're talking about how the media in Nepal and India across the border are playing the role in this dispute. And now in the second round, we'll talk about what should they have done and the solution. But Mr. Bhaumik has just joined, so I would like to ask him. He has worked in BBC for a long time. So what do you think, as a BBC correspondent, former BBC correspondent, what do you think that the handling of this sensitive issue, like Mr. Joy said, and Mr. Baral said, Mr. Khanal said, handling of this sensitive issue, serious technical issue, has the Indian and Nepali media been successful? What do you think, Mr. Bhaumik?
Well, Mr. Kuber, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay,
Please,
now, my 17 years in the BBC taught me one very clear thing, and that is that you need voices from both sides across the border. And something like the BBC was successful because it had Nepali service, Nepali Ramro bhayo, and then, you also had Bengali service and all these language services. We had enormous resources. It's more than the big Englishman, the Bigfoot from London, who understood actually nothing very much except few guys. Guys like me, guys like Mani Rana, our interaction actually helped create a situation where Indians and Nepalese in the BBC understood each other and therefore created a basis for the Bigfoots from London to understand what the real issue was. And that is a lesson I carry across now in my journalism. So when I left BBC, just giving you a small personal example very quickly, I had a newspaper, I edited a newspaper called Seven Sisters Post in Northeast. And one of the first things I did, taking the clue from Pramit, that he said, 70% America, I'm not interested in these bloody Americans, not in Trump, certainly. Yeah, I started a page in my paper called The Region, where apart from the global news, Prince Charles and Diana and all those rubbish that doesn't affect average Indians or Nepalese, we had stories from all across the region. So there were stories from Nepal, there were stories from Bangladesh, there were stories from Myanmar. So this whole regional focus that I started off in Seven Sisters, I've carried this on when I now do my Eastern Link website, is that the bridge between Nepal and India and the bridge between Bangladesh and India are regional journalists like us. People sitting in Delhi have a big Delhi hangover, They only see, as Mahfuz Anam rightly said once, a good friend from mine, he had its Daily Star in Bangladesh, that India has two neighbors and Bangladesh is not one of them. Bangladesh is India's two neighbors, meaning China and Pakistan. We're obsessed with that. And the trouble here really is, at one level, every Indian will tell you, Beti and all that stuff, that Jai was talking about, my good friend. But in reality, now, increasingly Indian journalists see Nepal in the largest Chinese game plan. They don't see Nepal. That is a big bloody trouble with these guys from Delhi. I'm not talking about Pramit. Don't take it otherwise. But what I'm trying to say is, most of these Delhi wallahs, and especially the Bhaks and the, all these Tilakdhari types, these idiots, and I'm using this term, they don't tend to see Nepal or Bangladesh as it were, as sovereign nations. They see everything as part of some big game plan, ISI, Chinese, you know. So this is where the trouble begins, that anything that Nepal does is very often today seen as some kind of a Chinese machination, something, you know, which the commissars from Beijing are trying to orchestrate. Now that's a huge, huge mistake. It's also a huge mistake on the part of every Nepalese who think India means Modi, who thinks India means Delhi. India means the whole of India. We in Bengal have a different attitude towards, you know, Bangladesh, or a different attitude toward Nepal. You are part of our whole. You know, Nepal or Bangladesh means more to me sitting in Calcutta than Delhi. Believe me, that's true. But the point here is that there is a problem with many Nepalese journalists, mainstream. You know, this whole bloody thing called mainstream, that's the big problem. Yeah, the mainstream Nepali journalists would always look to Delhi. Delhi mein hamero, you know, with whom I have relation in Delhi. So if you're Nepal Congress, you think Congress and that kind of thing. So the trouble in a lot of Nepalese journalists is they don't see us in Calcutta. They don't see people, you know, in the neighboring states. They want direct relations with Delhi. And the same is true in Bangladesh. That's where Awami League scores. Awami League, because of their freedom struggle experience, knows that a man from Tripura, a man from Calcutta is more important to them very often than a man in Delhi. Yeah, unless the man is Pranab Mukherjee or somebody like that.
Mr. Bhaumik, I'll stop you here. We understood that
you have to understand these regional factors.
The relation between Kathmandu and Delhi is one thing. The relation between Kathmandu and Calcutta, Kathmandu and Odisha, Kathmandu and Mizoram is also does also matter. We agree with your point of view. We'll continue with the second round. I'll come to Mr. Pramit Chaudhary. Sorry, first I'll give you, then I'll come to Mr. Khanal. We discussed about all these TRPs, all pressures, political pressure, social media pressure, monetary pressure, whatever. There are different opinions on that, how much the Indian television channel cost in Nepal, or does that have any monetary value or not. But still, what could have been the best solution in such a critical, sensitive issue, technical issue? How should have the media handle it? What could be the best possible solution?
Well, I think I think we all of us seem to agree that the original mistake, if you wish, lies at the political level in both countries. That the army chief Naravane in India misspoke by citing China. Even if he believed it, he should not have said it in public. I would argue Oli's response, and particularly the Maoist party's allowing of the Chinese ambassador to come into their internal, means that automatically now that party is seen as being controlled by China, whether or not it actually is. But having these sort of political errors being made at the top, the game then for the media, if you wish, is to be able to try and actually separate the grain from the chaff and say, just because a Chinese ambassador goes in there doesn't mean that the party necessarily is controlled. And just because the army chief says X, it doesn't necessarily mean the Indian government believes what he says. And so that is in many ways the real task that the media has to do, and it takes time. It's where you have to go to your sources, work your way through the system, and try to find out what exactly is the real story, if you wish, behind a lot of this. And my sense, for example, sitting in Delhi, is that ultimately the government, including the foreign ministry, doesn't believe China was behind Oli's action. They believe Oli has his own internal problems within his party, and that was probably a bigger reason than anything else, but Beijing was not ultimately the cause of this. But those are the type of things that media has to work out. The problem, as you've mentioned, is that social media responds almost very quickly. Television is not too much further behind. And the two fastest versions of media in terms of their response will prefer to take, if you wish, the masala version of the story, which is, as Subir is correct, in Delhi, it's much more exciting if I'm a TV anchor. Instead of trying to sit down and explain the internal politics of the Maoist party in Nepal, it's much easier for me to say, even if I'm going to bother to learn it, to just say, this is part of a giant superpower rivalry in which the US, China, Britain, everybody is involved somehow, and make it into a much bigger picture. And since unfortunately it coincided with a border dispute between India and China, it's much easier then to put all of these pieces together and make it. And the point is that nobody's going to be in a position to come out and say that that's wrong, right? So therefore it's very easy, and you pick up ratings. As you mentioned, you'll get more and more viewers will say, this guy's more exciting, and it sounds like it's much more interesting, so I'm going to listen to him. But ultimately, the good thing about all of this is that it often has a very limited impact. Social media, there are a lot of studies that show social media's impact is often limited to just hours before people just start to discount it. Television lasts a bit longer, but even in the Indian government, those who monitor media on the behalf of the government, and I told them, I said, yeah, well, I'm a newspaper man, which is like a dying sunset sector. They say, but you know, ultimately, people still go back to the newspapers to try to determine what actually happened. In other words, you'll see a social media huge increase over some issue they'll get excited about. Then the TV stations take off and they go off on their own strange orbit. Then the TV guys, the newspapers come in about 48 hours later and they say, not actually true. And they said, strangely, we see social media then suddenly die. The story dies. Nobody takes that seriously except maybe a small fringe group. So that still fundamentally, I think, remains for at least a broad section of the population. There are obviously going to be extremists on all ends, or people who are, some people like conspiracies. They prefer, conspiracies are much more fun. So they will always believe in something much deeper, and you know, they'll talk about the deep state, they'll talk about great power rivalry, they'll talk about, you know, corporate interests and so on, but without much evidence. So fundamentally, we still have to keep this in mind, that you still have a broad chunk of the population who are still interested in finding out the truth and who will still believe broadly what is happening, what mainstream newspapers or other credible voices, shall we say, are coming out and saying. In many ways, that remains, I would argue, the real focus of what you should be doing, because there's nothing much you can, there's a limit to what you can do on social media. I mean, most of us, I don't know about you, but most of us probably have just a few thousand followers, because we're not the type who create millions of followers, because that's not the kind of, we don't produce the kind of material that millions of followers will come into. So therefore, it's not possible for us to have much influence on social media. We should try, but I don't expect us to. TV is a madhouse, and they deliberately will not bring in people who are moderate. I won't say the station, but one station brought me in India, which is famous for its yelling and shouting, brought me in for 3 days, 3 times, and eventually said, you know, we can't bring you anymore because you don't get angry enough. And I said, well, I'm trying to make a rational argument here. They said, nobody's interested in rational argument. They want people want to be angry. So I said, okay, that's fine. You need somebody else. You don't need me. And it was fine. I didn't have an issue with that. But the point is, that was what they were driven by, because that's how they get their ratings. So I don't think we should give up on these issues, on making that argument forward. But it's obviously going to be a harder slog. And as all of everybody else has mentioned, given the should we say, very big focus structure of which Delhi thinks, and that general ignorance that exists about other smaller, what they see as smaller issues, it's a much bigger, harder sell in Delhi or in almost any major capital, if you wish, in the world, to sell the smaller country story.
Thank you. I'll come to Mr. Khanal now. You were telling about how could it have been dealt with, or without being influenced by social media or politics or anything. How could it have been dealt in a very smart, diplomatic way? Because it's not only about roti beti, it's about a long-term relationship, cultural, historical, economic. Since I'm the editor in the economic daily newspaper, there's so many economic relation, trade and transit, and so many railways. Now we're talking the current government that is blamed for blaming the Indian government that has in the budget said it's going to join the Kalighat, that ship is coming through Kalighat. So there are so many things that we're going to do together. But instead, this thing, the mishandling of by the some section of media has spoiled, or like you said, the context itself was spoiled and media took it over. But what could be the solution? How could it have been dealt by the media actually?
Okay, I want to again take a step back to the relationship between journalism and popular opinion. Here, I would like to, diverge, Pramit, who sort of valorized the role of the print media. But unfortunately, what's happening today is that the linkage between journalism and popular opinion is being distorted. And the print media has increasingly been pushed to the sidelines here. And there is a greater role of, greater influence of popular medias like social media, which is not just a media, but a platform, including for the print media, for the broadcast media, and also for ordinary citizens. So everybody is in the social media, and it is primarily through the digital tech platforms that they reach out to the people. But at the same time, the problem here starts because there is a dangerous trend where there is a combination of identity politics and ideological politics, of which nationalism is an important component. And it's combined with distortion of the media for multiple reasons, and also combination with populism, which leads to a strange and difficult and complicated kind of processes in the society. So what's happening here is that the media and politics are slowly losing ground to populism. So popular pressures are shaping foreign policy rather than politics and the media, especially the print media. So this is kind of a reversal from what we used to see in the past, where public philosophers used to lead the popular opinion. But here, especially in the case of Nepal, what you are seeing is nationalism is an ideology. And the ideology of nationalism is so popular, so strident, and it is directly linked to this anti-Indian sentiments. And so there is a huge mass at present which selectively consumes news. So even if you provide rational news and truth, it is selectively consumed, and some are completely disregarded. So anything of India, it is rejected, increasingly being rejected by large population. So that's the kind of problem that we are seeing here. And also the ruling regimes and the politicians they depend on strident nationalism to galvanize their political base in order to know they sort of favor journalists who are loyal, who are very loud, and who do not care about what's true and what's false, who do not care about professional use of journalism. So they have basically sold their soul in favor for money or power or whatever. So the regimes prefer loyal, partisan, and loud media, and the media sector itself is being distorted because of that. So we are seeing a greater role of TV and the social media, where characters who have lost their souls or who are blinded by ideology, they are finding greater platform, greater voice, greater following. So, like Pramitji said, a print media journalist would not have a lot of followers, but a very narcissist personality would have millions of followers, So that's the problem here. So what we need to do is, we need political leaders and professional media, again, to, have a bigger role to play. And so the first step, of course, is for the political regimes to conduct a more mature diplomacy which is a problem because they want to appease the popular masses, want to appease the populist sentiments, want to appease the nationalistic feelings. So that's a problem, but the solution has to start from there. And the second step is for the professional media institutions and journalists to start talking with each other, to reflecting on what's happening in the media sector, what's happening in our society, what's happening in our political arena. So I think, then we might be able to come up with solutions. So this is a larger process. I don't think a solution can be found overnight, and especially, the border dispute between Nepal and India is an example, a perfect example of what's wrong with our societies. What's this dangerous trend of populism, media, and politics.
Kuber sir?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Khanal. There was some technical problem. Now I'll come to Mr. Baral. We listened about how populism is trying to distort the media. The traditionally, what we started with saying media for input source, forming the foreign policy decisions. Now that has been distorted by the populism and social media and various other factors. And in this issue, in this particular issue, sensitive technical issue also, it has distorted, and we have agreed. So what could we have done better, much better, so that it could have been, because in a way, we accept that distorting and creating better relation as well. So what do you think, in short, what do you think could we have done better, or the Indian, our counterparts, or the Indian media have done better? Baral, Mr. Baral.
Okay, I'd like to make 2 or 3 points. First of all, about the long-term and short-term impact. Say the kind of news coverage the Indian news channels are running about Nepal, where they are saying China is sponsoring, doing this and that. The immediate effect could be there are millions of Nepalese working in India. What if the lockdown is lifted, and what if people start, chasing them away? This is a genuine fear. I've talked to so many experts, and this is the first fear they say, they express about the consequence of the Indian news channels, which are blowing things up. Luckily, there's a long-term effect as well. For instance, I started writing for various Indian news outlets at the time of the blockade, because I thought people there needed to know what the view from Nepal, and I was very fortunate in the way when I started writing, I started getting response from people from all kinds of people in India, and so when I started writing, I also began to understand that there are people in India, there are people, influential people who influence India's foreign policy, who read serious stuff, who read my stuff, got back to me. They criticized me on some issues, but they backed me on others. Even now, if you look at various Indian newspapers, the Hindustan Times or Hindu, there are many pieces that you could easily read as pro-Nepal, written by currently being written by Indians. So it's not like that there is no understanding of what is happening in Nepal, in India at all. There are people who understand, there are people who are trying to put it out, and there are people who are trying to work out solutions, So in the long term, I think this makes a difference, because when the Indian government has to decide, has to make Nepal policy, it consults those experts, 3 or 4 experts in Nepal. And luckily they are not, these experts don't think the Nepal government has sold out to China or any such easy narrative. They have a much more nuanced understanding of what's happening in Nepal. And I would say the same about India. There are people in Nepal who understand India's complexities, why it needed to come to Kalapani, and how hard it would be to pull back now when it's when it's actively engaged in conflict with China in Ladakh, so there is a serious discussion. So I think I would say still now, both in India and in Nepal, there are places in media, there are in think tanks where the serious discussion, the long-term consequences, how we shape our relationship, that is coming up. And so two more points I'd like to say is one thing I've noted as a result of this controversy is this the need to redefine special relations, and that was primarily heard in Nepal. Now, even Indian commentators who know Nepal well, they are saying like, yes, like Nepalese are saying this for ages now. So let's really redefine special relations, because when India emphasizes special relations, the feeling in Nepal is that it's much easier for it to do so because it's the big power, right? Big economically, militarily, so it's much easier for it to do so. But if you want to revisit 1950 treaty, everything, we can't have it all our own way, right? They will have their say as well. So if we want to redefine a special relationship, make it more equal, like we like to say, how do we do it? What our government, for instance, this government is saying, we want more equality in relationship with India. So what does that mean? Does that mean it wants to end the visa-free travel? Does it mean we should close our open border? Or does it only mean we want to change provisions that are beneficial for us? So I think what I see happening is on both the sides, among Indian intellectuals who know Nepal well, and among Nepali intellectuals, that there's this effort to redefine special relations. What does it mean? And another thing is another factor that will play an increasingly bigger role in Nepal-India relations is China, whether you like it or not. So what is China's role? And in this trilateral, now we talk about trilateral relation, Nepal, India, and China, and India has not been interested in it at all. So my personal feeling is that Nepal-India relations are, in international relations, geography determines a lot of things, So Nepal and India are so linked geographically and culturally, religiously. Nepal-China relations can never reach that level, at least not immediately, So maybe many in India understand that, maybe they don't. So we need to somehow, as the influence of China increases in South Asia, we need to somehow keep emphasizing this point that our natural affinity for India, for relations with India, can never match our linkages with China. So even if there is a pro-China government, which I think currently we do have, it's a democratic government, and it has to listen to people. It has to listen to public sentiment. And even in the issue of Kalapani right now, it only decided to amend the constitution when there was a huge uproar after the Indian army chief came out with the link with China. So I think these issues need to be discussed in forums like this. For instance, AIDIA hosted this forum, and we see other kind of webinars being hosted, and some very nuanced discussions are taking place, and I'm so happy to see that. There has been this huge controversy, and two countries there's a lot of disagreement, but there is also this kind of conversations taking place. So that is certainly a step in the right direction. And I think even if this rational dialogues don't have immediate appeal and solutions, but when those in decision-making level get involved in it, I think in long term, it's certainly good for both the countries.
Thank you, Mr. Baral. I would like to come to Mr. Bhaumik. Subirji, he was talking about slightly like what Biswas was saying. There are different India inside India, and changing of narratives. The old narratives, the traditional narratives, has to change, and it's time to change. So Mr. Bhaumik was earlier saying about the relationship between Kathmandu and Delhi. Not only that is important, it is important to have the relationship between the different quarters in India with Kathmandu. So I think this is one of the steps towards changing narratives and changing the discourse. So what could be the media's role in changing this narrative? Mr. Bhaumik, are you still there?
I have a slight problem. Yeah, I'm there.
Yeah,
Do you hear
please.
me? Are you getting me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. No, you see, I have a slight problem when you say Indian media. Pramit made this point earlier in the debate when I was listening. Indian media is not a monolith. You have fools out there sitting in the studio making all kinds of noise. The difference I have with Pramit's approach is, I can be rational. When you are rational, I can also shout this chap down if I have to. And the trouble is that these guys are only about making noise. The main problem here is very, very simple. And that is the regions of India also have a lot of complaints with Delhi. When the Indian Prime Minister comes to Calcutta and after this terrific cyclone announces a 1,000 crore package, whereas they have spent 3,000 crores to make the Patel of statue of Sardar Patel. As a Bengali sitting in Calcutta, I feel, they're throwing crumbs at me. Now, I can understand the problem of Nepal much better than this Bigfoot from Delhi for the very simple reason that I have pretty similar issues going with Delhi. You see, the regions of India, this being a very big country, that I have similar issues. I know how people from Delhi would treat guys in the region. So what I was trying to suggest, I would suggest three very clear things. That don't write off Indian media as one big monolith. It's not. You have regional media, who are closer to you, as Pramit rightly said. South India, they don't care about Nepal. But, we in the East do. There are states which are bordering you. They have some problems. They also have relations. The economies depend on each other, and that's very important. Economic mutual interdependence is a big, big driver of good relations. So, there are places in India which are very close interdependence with the Nepalese economy, and therefore they have a vested interest in good relations with Nepal. This is number one. So Nepal also, as a smaller country, needs to play. Their diplomats need to be much smarter than getting into this strident nationalist rhetoric, which helps nowhere. Talking about the statement of the army chief, I think belatedly, the last two army chiefs in India, their diet of one press conference a day does not really help. Military people should not be talking so much. Try to recall General Manekshaw, who won this great war for us. Pramit, how many press conferences did Manekshaw have in a week? Not even one. I've covered the East. He was earlier in Eastern Command. Under his tutelage, we saw the bombing of Aizawl in Mizo Hills, but he didn't address the press. Yeah, he had a private circle of friends, and he won this war for us. These generals are having one press conference a day in Delhi. Every day you will find General Navrani or General Rawat saying something to the defense beat reporters who faithfully reported. And the problem is, when you talk too much, you get into trouble. And as they say, war is too important a business to be left to generals. Certainly diplomacy cannot be left to generals. You are getting into huge trouble if you do that. So, the government has to restrain these people. Yeah. And, the other big thing that I would like to insist on is that media, when you say media, you don't expect the whole of Indian media to respond uniformly. As Pramit rightly said, a big country with different approaches. The best bet is to have greater interaction between Nepalese media and media in the Indian regions which are close to Nepal. And that's your gateway to Delhi. You try to deal with Delhi directly, then you come back with a bad feeling that X and Y, the Bigfoot in Delhi, didn't care for you because he does not understand the importance of Nepal. This is number one. Number two, very important. We in India will have to, I wrote this piece, which Biswas was talking about, that there are many people in it. I wrote a piece called India Does Not Need a Monroe Doctrine. And this was during the Madhesi movement, the Madhesi movement and the blockade and all that stuff. We in India don't need a Monroe Doctrine. We need a cooperative federal relationship extended to our neighborhood. Gujral, Manmohan Singh, whatever, you stakeholders in our growth, we are stakeholders in your growth and that kind of stuff. But the most important thing here is that you stress on economic mutual interdependence. You look at those things. Yeah, you don't expect the national media to come and report, the big media in Delhi, that for despite Delhi saying, the border trade between India and Bangladesh is not opening through Petropol and Benapol, which accounts for 60% of the bilateral trade. So these are issues which are bound to be taken up much more effectively by the media in the region. So please remember this, that that you need to interact more with the regional media, actually, people who are interested in you more. And the other thing is, in India, of course, the Indian media will have to live down this habit of seeing everything through the prisons of, as Pramit said, big power rivalry, just because it's more salacious, just because it's more sort of, trendy, that's just because it's more sort of spicy. No, it's not. Nepal is a sovereign nation. Nepal has its own political dynamics, maybe strident nationalism, but how do I criticize Nepali nationalism when we have a very toxic version of nationalism ripping my own country apart? Where actually in the name of Indian nationalism, you're dividing Indians and Indians more stridently than ever before. And I don't think these guys are nationalists. They just, do you mean to say Amit Shah, when he said, Hum Jaladasti, Pakistan, Kashmir le lenge, Aksai Chin le lenge, that brings the PLA to your door. This joker has not done NCC in his life. He can't pick up a 303 rifle. Yeah, except that Lati and Churi in a bloody RSS Shaka. He has never picked up a rifle. He has not done his NCC. Yeah, leke aa jayenge, itna mazak hai kya? So the point here is, don't take these guys very seriously. They may be very powerful. Their only USP is in bringing rival governments down in the states, using ill-gotten money from crony capitalists. These guys are complicating India's national relations with the neighborhood. Just imagine Bangladesh. Indian army, 8,000 soldiers died to create Bangladesh. Today, when you call Bangladesh is termite, it's a proud Bengali nation. You're going to lose them forever. And when you say Bangladesh is a termites, as a Bengali, it hits me also, because my roots are in East Bengal. So the problem here is, ye jumla walon ko chhodiye, ye sab bakwas karne wale hai. You deal with the people of India directly. You deal with people like us, who understand the region, who understand the neighborhood. Yeah, don't deal with these jokers who are in power today and may not be in power tomorrow. They are complicating India's relationship with everybody.
Thank you. We have short of time, so we have to talk to another list also. So thank you, Mr.
Forgive
Bhaumik.
me, I'm a Bengali. I'm emotional. No. I'm given to outbursts.
We give much respect to your views and opinions. Don't worry. But we have short of time. Thank you, Mr. Bhaumik. Now I'll come to Mr. Jay. As you have been watching both the sides,
Jay is a good friend,
and the relation, diplomacy, that's a bit critical and sensitive thing. And border dispute, that is much more technical and critical, and in between two close friends, which share a long border since many years. So don't you think the media could have come, like we are trying to do something, some small, maybe 0.1% of some action, media could have come a little bit much more learned, much more practical, much more wide eagle's eye view of the thing. What do you think?
Thank you for that. And Subir, it was very nice listening to you after a very, very long time.
Right, Jay.
Kuberji, I would like to pick up one word from your question, and that would be impact.
Yeah.
What exactly is impacting the decisions, so whether that is a policy decisions or everyday political decision in both the countries, and mostly, let's say, in our side. Let me tell you one example, a very simple example. I worked for MCC. We came up with this huge project. It's a free $500 million to Nepal, almost no strings attached. But the mayhem there is in media, and I think on every other platform, I think you are the one who can witness it. I mean, there is nothing. It's $500 million free of cost project built by the best of the professionals and the engineers of the world, being brought over here and installed in 5 years' time. Yet we have such a big issue over there. And as I was trying to look at internet, what exactly are there in Nepal on MCC, you will be surprised, Kuberji. I discovered at least 50 to 60 different short videos produced, all having a running narration that how MCC is going to damage the country, how the Americans are going to come over here and shoot the people, okay? How Nepal is going to be virtually a slave state of the USA. Earlier, I was thinking that perhaps it is limited to social media and maybe at personal level. But I am amazed the kind of electronic literature that is over there on internet. These are all very dedicated short documentaries, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, with video effects, sound effects, with the footage from all over the world, the Americans' food going here and then wars and everything. And why that is happening? Just because there is a vested interest possessed by a group of politicians who, for their own sake, mostly coming out from their intra-party affairs, they don't want MCC over there because they want to make Mr. Oli look bad because he wants to pass it. So what I'm trying to draw your conclusion by saying that is this. These politicians, and I think their henchmen and their peers and their supporters, have developed a kind of alternate for this mainstream media. So I don't know, a very nice piece or nice editorial that Biswas will be writing, what kind of impact that will have on Nepal's or on India's policy making. I'm not too sure if Pramit comes up with a beautiful opinion piece and that would have any impact, let's say, in a short term. So these politicians, these political parties have come up with an alternate media vehicle that is a combination of electronic and social media, and they are working overnight, and they are the one that is making, I think, the difference. Now the issue in Nepal is this. Earlier, Oli was thinking that he will pass MCC through the parliament. And I was thinking that if he let it go through the parliament, it should be all right, because the euphoric expressions there in media, I think, are momentary. But I think it's going to be making much more damage to him, even if he passes it, because the message is so very penetrated even to the grassroots that I think that would have some toll on his political outcome in future. So what I'm trying to say is this. Gone are the days when the newspapers used to make an impact. And I think also gone are the days when televisions are making an impact. Now, this is dedicated, very committed, very well-funded, small groups that are, I think, doing the work for these political parties, the leaders. And I think in India, be that BJP or some other parties, the story is no different. Even over there, I think they have these people in thousands.
BJP IT cell.
Yeah, they are in thousands. They spend in millions. And I think they are the one who make the real impact. I tell you another very short story that happened just yesterday. You know, this Samajwadi Party, Upendra Yadav and Rajpa of Man Thakur, that is merged. And now there is a third party that is going to be in making, let's say from today onward, and maybe it will be authorized in a few days or a few weeks' time. Yesterday, there came in social media, posted by one of the party men of one of these two parties, where you can see Babu Ram's name was, I think, tipexed, and his order was brought from 2 to number 4. Now look at this. That posting made by a few, I think, second or third layer politicians on social media has already impacted what it had to impact. Now, they don't need to wait what would be there on television or what would be there on newspapers, because in no time, it just propagated like anything, like a fire in the jungle. And then there were the arguments and the counter arguments, then there were the justifications, and there were the reconciliations and whatnot. So I think the damage is done, or whatever had to be done is done. Now, whatever is going to be there in television or newspaper would be irrelevant. So I was picking up the word impact. So this is the kind of impact that I think this alternate medium is now having. So when we talk about the relationship of the two countries and a very sensitive issue like border, as Biswas was saying, that we need to be really thinking in the long term. Also we need to be very mindful what is happening in the short term. As Ajay was talking about this, go back Indian media during that blockade period or during that earthquake period. I think the Indian policymakers or the decision makers now worry more about that kind of outcry on social media than what there would be an opinion piece or an editorial on any broadsheet over here. I think that is happening on both the countries. I don't think there are too many people who would be watching the show of, let's say, this very famous Indian TV journalist, okay, Goswami. I don't think there are too many Nepalis, but now he's a household name. Everybody knows him, and thanks to social media. So I think the policy makers, the decision makers, also those who work in media for some serious objectives, they need to pay a very serious attention to these kind of new developments and phenomena which are making real impact than what the impacts are there either through the broadsheets or through the television channels.
Thank you, Mr. Jay. I think we have almost finished time. If anyone wants to add very quick uh, 2 minutes we have. Mr. Pramit, is there anything to add?
Your sound is gone. Hello?
Okay, then I would like to conclude this. By our discussion, we figured out that there's a lot of there are vested interest groups, lobby groups, and politicians who wants to find different things. Then there's a very idea and which anyone can use, which has been very much of a very big challenge to the mainstream media, because most of the time in Nepal, pressure and these things. There is media, like there are people, you people are there.
I think Kuber sir has some technical problems, so I think we should wrap up this discussion here. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. So let's wrap up this. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to all of you, and thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.
Because you cannot change your neighbor. That's the very popular saying. And on top of that, we are not the neighbors like any other countries in the world. We have different backgrounds, we have different histories, and these problems will crop up. Different, like our friend said, Mr. Subir said, Bhaumik said, there are many India inside India. So Kathmandu should develop the relations between the regional capitals also, so that we have much better relation with Delhi. So with this, I thank you all, gentlemen, with letting me to moderate you all great people. And I thank AIDIA also for this great occasion and opportunity. Thank you. We'll see you soon, maybe after the lockdown. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kuberji. It was very nice talking to you.
Thank you.